that you cannot access this, but it appears to be accessible. Okay, so I will record this. Be a couple things on the board, and then for notes, like I said, I didn't quite get to the video, so I'll do it next week, and we'll go from there. Something else I was going to tell you.
What's the good or?
Oh, I just mentioned the good. The good news was I had a new computer. The gooder news is, you hear the gooder news? I found my hop seat. Oh, it isn't working. It's getting old. It's getting kind of old. There we go. Hop seat. Oh, so close to my pocket. Where this is from? I swear to you, I am not making this up. This is from Prague.
Oh. That's cool.
But it's getting old. It's getting kind of up there. They don't make hopsies like they used to. Yeah. Yeah. Everyone just watch. One more time. We'll see it one more time. If you get in the stairwell, it's really loud. Sometimes it's a little scary. We won't go there. Okay, so let's go through a few things in really quick. A review. Oh, I did assign chapter 3 of America, correct?
Yeah.
And let me repeat, my room is cold. I like air circulating because I have to be here all day. Sometimes they let me home. Go home occasionally, but so I'm warning you, my room will be cold. I like to see people's breaths in the winter. See, I know you're there. See, that's for me. So no more than 40 or 50 below zero, I promise you. Quote me on that. I'm not kidding about it. All right, so, yeah. And the other problem is, these old rooms, this relatively old building, but the heat in the winter, if I turn it up, it gets too hot like a medium. And I would rather have it a little bit cool than hot. So that's it. All right, so yesterday I went through a lot of stuff about, kind of a slightly big deal about racism. What's the rebellion? Bacon. Yeah, bacon is a key element. We see that thinking all through history. And what is the name for how people or countries or entities deal with scarce items? Well, mercantilism is an example of a policy of this. Say it again? Yeah, that's economics or economy, how they deal with scarce items. So you're going to see like economic imperialism and all things like that are all dealing with these scarce items or stealing these scarce items. A lot of it's that. Sorry, I got to move this.
Why do you have the rights just right there?
Huh?
Why do you have the rights just right there?
What else would it be?
I mean, it
Could be on you.
I'm gonna blink it.
But see, this corner's got to be in the middle of this box.
Why?
This corner's got to be in the middle of this box. I don't know why. It just has to be. And if it's not, it bugs me. And it's totally irrational. We all have little irrational quirks. That's one of my quirks. Okay, so. That's really weird, isn't it? But it's mine. So we talk about mercantilism is an economic policy, means a country must accumulate, the whole goal is to accumulate what? Gold. What do you call gold and silver coins? What's the term for that where the wealth is actually in the coins? Species. Currency represents something that governments will issue, and they back it up by the wealth and taxation, etc. of the government. But the currency itself, that little piece of paper, the dollar, is not worth anything. Oh, by the way, who issues the U.S. currency? Yeah, the Federal Reserve. Created in 1913, appointed the head of it. They're appointed by the president. They serve a term. If you look at note that says Federal Reserve note, yeah, they issue it. They control the money supply. They're really powerful. And so with that, how to wash it. So mercantilism, accumulate gold, that means maximize what kind of trade? exports, as many exports as possible. Suck in wealth. And colonies provide what then? Raw materials and what kind of market? Or a captive market. Yeah, they can only buy from the mother country. Mother country provides manufactured goods. And the whole thing about colonies then, suck the wealth out. I mean, literally just suck it all out. And this is something that's very common in colonies. Even if there might be wealth in there, wealth in the colony, there's never money. There's never specie or currency. They're always short of it. And so even the tiny little bit of taxation hits the colonists hard because they just don't have extra money. Wealth is not necessarily money. Wealth could be land or other things of value. Now, it might give you money because you use it as collateral and borrow if there were banks. There's no banks in the colony. There's only a few banks around. There wouldn't be banks in what is now the United States. A bank is relative to what we know as a bank, to the 1790s. The countries have been around for about 15 years before there's a bank, a real bank. So there's always going to be short of money and money circulating. So mercantilism doesn't work, by the way. No, it actually doesn't work, and it's proven by, what is it called when Britain could not enforce the salutary neglect? And what are the laws that Britain called? What are those laws that try to? Yeah, those navigation acts. They couldn't enforce them. So, did we get then? We have a colonial colony. We mentioned imperialism. Is that why we quit then?
Salutary neglect.
Salutary neglect. Did we define it? We know what imperialism is. Empire for profit. All right. So let's go ahead. I'm going to leave this up because I'm going to go to a PowerPoint here in a sec. But it's such a pain now to turn this on, and I got to log in and stuff. So you have to see the lot. You can see this beautiful scene, which I despise. It's the same scene they had last year. And at first it's kind of pretty. I soon became to hate this valley.
Can you change it?
No, they won't let you change it. I asked. They won't let me change it. This is how they know your computer is functioning if that screen comes up like this. It's all a plot against me. I'm not paranoid, but everyone's out to get me. Let me pull this map up for a second. And anybody want a paper cut? Put your hand right here, and I'll show you a paper cut. You ready? This one's a little scary.
Oh.
Yeah, they don't make maps like this anymore. Literally, this company's out of business. Oh, come on. That's a map. We can't slow it down. All right, so let's make a table then. We're going to show how, therefore, the colonies develop unique economic systems. And it should show with salutary neglect, there's more trade, there's more economy, there's more wealth, there's more innovation. Mercantilism doesn't work. But those in power like mercantilism because of that one word I just said, power. It's amazing how many times people would rather give up chances for more wealth if they could have more power. Power is what people in charge love the power. That's why I control you with an iron fist. Is everybody like, cool? So we have northern colonies, southern colonies. Let's review the northern colonies. What are these colonies called again? Yeah, the New England colonies, and what are these called again? The Mid-Atlantic. New England, Mid-Atlantic. I'm going to give you a very generic list of how people dealt with these scarce resources, aka sort of businesses, farms, whatever it might be. New England, Mid-Atlantic. The southern colonies then, remember what we called these? Yeah, the Chesapeake colonies and the Deep South, or the slave kingdom. And that's a much more appropriate word than anybody else because the people who came there with the wealth and the land were coming from the Caribbean where they set up a literal slave kingdom of sugar plantations. Couldn't quite grow sugar there. No sugar in Louisiana, but Louisiana was then claimed by Spain. Let's say Spain, I meant France. So let's look at the northern economy and some of the ways people made a living here. Well, first off, most of the colonists who went there who considered themselves citizens of Britain. They would have said, we're Englishmen. They're farmers. But these are small farms. They're small farms. Because of the terrain, geography means so much. The geography of the north, it's really fertile, but I mean, they do a little bit of topography here, a lot of mountains, narrow valleys, so you can't get the big plantations, just by definition. The only area where you're going to see the plantations are along the Hudson, and these, the Dutch settled here first, so a lot of Dutch families would become plantation owners. And the descendant of those, one of the most famous were the Roosevelts. And then a little bit New Jersey, and then this is not the Chesapeake County. There's still going to be slaves in New Jersey in the Civil War. Not by choice, obviously, but there's still a few slave holders, is a better way to put it. They grew beans, wheat, cattle production, a little bit of pig, but mostly they call this in the northern latitudes the wheat cattle farm. Just basically wheat cattle. You know, for a little bit further south, they could grow maize, but wheat was quite efficient there. One crop. Most of farmers, they did it for subsistence farming. You know, just grow enough for themselves to survive. They would sell to cities or other places, but small farms, prosperous, small. So because of that, you're not going to have the domination by one group like the Burgesses in Virginia, but also a very vibrant merchant class then. So the cities will be there, more trade, and because there's more merchants, there's going to be more cities. By definition, a lot of these things, like there'll be shipbuilding, ironworks. I'm generically calling iron metal work, that kind of thing. Hats were big business, and also rum. All of this urban. Okay, urban is relative, but most of the cities, this map shows it pretty well. Even by the Revolutionary War, population is actually pretty even, but there's more cities in the north. Many more cities, because there's more urban production. And obviously things that happen in these like slaughterhouses and things like that. There's also ship means these ports, there's going to be a very vibrant fishing, there's going to be lumber, and then along the frontier, fur. Also, with all this, there's much more business activity. That means there's bills of sales, potential disagreements, lots of lawyers. They're going to be in the north. No banks yet. But these merchants, if they can accumulate wealth, they would become creditors. They would loan money. And we'll talk more about that down the road. Pretty, you know, a lot of stuff. Yeah.
So basically, the Deep South was based back and compared to the rest of America, and even before America.
You mean the Deep South was what? I didn't hear that.
The Deep South was always.
Well, worse is relative to the people who have the money. They thought it was pretty good.
Yes, but those were tiny amount of people, and like 99%. And
yeah.
Everyone else bought the South was so.
Not really. I mean, that might be coming down the road, but worse is a relative term. So let's not say worse, but obviously very different. Because worse, that's opinion, right? We're kind of, you can have opinion, but it's hard to say. In the South, most of the citizens, they're farmers too. They're small farmers, but it's different. They're small farmers. Remember that the indentured servants had the poor land. This is the corn or maize pork farming. More maize and pigs. That's what they call it in the South. In fact, Illinois is really a funny state. Illinois, it's like cut right down the middle back. It was like right here. That was the border line. This is like really called South. And if you go to Illinois, this is like in the South. And then here you're kind of in the north. It's now more urban rural than that, but that's the way it was. Pig, corn. Subsistence farmers, most of them were, and any surplus they sold to the slave owners. There's also going to be, some timber. Why I put timber, not lumber, I don't know, but I think you know what I mean. Here they called it lumber. Here they called it timber. I'm acting like that's what they did. I just wrote it for whatever reason. Fur trade, of course. But of course, what are the big money makers in the South? These plantations. AKA, they were literally slave labor camps. And they could happen because of this tidewater region, this flat, broad plain, much more open to big farmers. And so those with wealth can get the land claimed can move in, and they're always obsessed with land. So the small farmers are being on the frontier of little pockets of them. This is pretty swampy, but still plantation. And there were 3 main crops. One we've talked about, Virginia and tobacco. South Carolina, because of the swamp, they grew rice. Now, rice, you might not think of a cash crop, but it stores really easy. You keep rice for a long time. And they would sell the rice to the big plantations down there. These hellholes that were the sugar plantations. The worst things to imagine.
So were those ones mostly nuts?
Well, in what's going to become the United States? Yeah. Yeah, they just chewed up humans. I mean, the cruelty was beyond comprehension. But that's also why such a great percentage of people who live here, like 70% of people who live in Cuba, are backward descent because of all the slaves. It's those descendants of those who survived. And what's the dye that was really, really valuable? Yeah, indigo. Someone said it. And indigo is kind of this purple dye, but you can use it as a mixture for other colors. You have this reed and for me. No.
Me?
Yeah, they got you. Go right near the end of the period. I don't think it doesn't say it. Doesn't seem like it. Probably just something. I narrowed it down, didn't I? It's probably something.
Probably.
So, this reed would grow, and they would cut the reed in the swamps. Backbreaking, awful work. Has anyone ever been to these swamps of South Carolina? South Carolina's just all swamps. Did you see any of those fun little animals that float around the swamps? Yes.
Yeah.
Alligators.
Yeah.
And they're like, and this is just an estimate. Some people say they're like 15 to 20 feet long. You're close to one, and they're 1,000 feet long. They're massive. Backbreaking, awful work, malaria. That's where, remember African slaves because of the malaria? And so the actual owners would live in mansions in Charleston, and the slaves would be out doing the backbreaking work where they would do the rice, or they would cut these reeds. Then they would lay it out in the sun and let it rot, and I guess it would just reek, stink so bad. Beat it on a rock, and then this kind of purple, stinky pulp would come up, and it was worth its weight in gold. It was so valuable. And purple was seen as a color of wealth. And the reason why is it goes way back to the Phoenicians in 2,000–3,000 BC. There's this purple dye they got from snail shells and snails. They ground up snails. Let's not think about it too much. And that was seen as the color of wealth and royalty. And that just stayed. So when they found this stinky reed, hey, we're rich, indigo. And so, one more thing. There was some cotton production. They have long seed cotton. But most cotton comes in a little shell. You have to by hand break open the shell and pull out a little fluff of cotton. Really labor intensive. They really didn't have much use for it. The Industrial Revolution is coming. Then everything will change. But not yet. One more thing. Another massive market with a lot of wealth. What? Yeah, slaves. Slaves. That's real wealth. Human beings. Buying and selling of human beings. And not just the transatlantic slave trade where people would be kidnapped, usually thinking they're going into being like indentured servants to pay off a debt. Next thing they know, they're coming this way. But also slaves, plantation needs a little money, sell off a few slaves. And that was big business in the South. Now, there are slaves in the North. There are slaves on this plantation, there were slaves in Boston, but because of the nature of the economy, not as many. And so what that meant was, in the South, those who have the plantations and those who have the slaves have a significant amount of political power because they have the wealth. Now, looking at this very generic table, obviously it's more complex, but generically, let's say you want to immigrate or migrant when it was still a colony, but come from Britain to the colonies or to the United States. Look at even later on. Let's say you have enough money to make it across, but you don't have enough money to buy a plantation. You barely have enough, and you're going to start from scratch when you get there. Which section would you go to? The North or the South?
Or you're saying, do we have a choice?
You have a choice, but you have no money.
Well, South for money because it's all slave labor camps, and if you can get a slave labor camp, you can make a lot.
But you have no money now, so how would you buy it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Nobody really knows what you were losing all of it. They're like looking like, so I think for themselves, it's cheaper than money.
Well, if most of the crops are like tobacco and then later on cotton, food would become even more expensive because there's less of it. But other parts are cheaper. They knew a lot, they knew at least some idea, because this was the beginnings of the golden age of pamphleteers and newspapers, even though people lied. This is much more diversified though. So there's more opportunity if you don't have anything. So when people from England started coming over and then immigrating to the United States, more and more started going north. And so when the Revolutionary War began, the populations were relatively even of colonists, but quickly exploded up here. By the time of the Civil War, there were over 21 million citizens of the United States in the north and 9 million in the south. Let me rephrase that. 5 million citizens in the south, 4 million slaves. What are you going to say? That's a big part of it. That is a big part. And you can imagine how the South feels. As more and more people come here, they feel isolated, paranoid, powerless, desperate, and as we'll find out, incredibly reckless in the South. Because so many went here. But we see this here, don't we? I mean, think about right now. You live in Helena, which I know is pretty amazing. But there might be more opportunities in a place like Missoula. It's just twice the size. Just as there's more opportunities in Helena than there are in Townsend. And for that matter, there are more opportunities in Seattle than Missoula. And that's why so many people leave. Even if they don't want to, it's difficult to stay in a really small town because there's just not as many opportunities. And those who remain become quite entrenched and reactionary and scared. I mean, there's a big rural-urban divide in this country. And we see elements of that coming right here. But look at the divide. So north and south. It's already starting before the Revolutionary War. And then would accelerate after when it's the United States as a country. So that's a colony. And it's more and more fueled by trade and salutary neglect. But what kind of trade? So it's overseas trade, interior trade. So there's virtually no roads. That's one thing the South has that's really good for them. They have rivers. Broad rivers. In the north, because of the mountain valleys, they might have rivers, but there's a lot of rapids, waterfalls, hard to sail past. Might be good down the road for power, but that's another story. Sorry, I'm doing something here. Give me a sec. They've changed how they do this. Sorry. This is good TV, isn't it? You're watching me do this? This is exciting stuff. Oh, shoot. Okay, I think this will work. Ah, good, it worked. So look at the population growth. These areas that are shaded right here, the blue, etc., that's where by 1660 you see little tiny settlements, and they're pretty sparse, couple little towns. By 1750, all of these areas at least were under some kind of colonial control. Settlement, obviously, a little more dense near the cities. And you also notice a bigger French presence, even though never as many. But the population began to grow as the economies grew, more opportunity to get away from the very restrictive society of Britain to a slightly less restrictive society in the colonies. Wrong one, no, don't worry about that. Huh. Disappeared. Populations went up. It's gone. We're not doing that. Populations began to go up dramatically. Just go with me on that. Populations begin to go up dramatically. Some reaction. Let's go. Wow. Yeah, about 1.5 million by 1750, almost 3 million just 20 years later. But the one thing that developed out of this, something you probably heard about, we have to mention, this constant trade routes are going to be developed, this called generic idea of triangular trade. And this is to maximize profits. The idea would be that they'll always try to trade something that will keep the ships open or keep the ships full, never have them empty. And so trade here, something to that effect where if they drop something off, they fix something up, so the ships are never empty. Empty ships are quite expensive. And you'll see that when you get one of those really long trains of like coal cars coming from the west. And every once in a while they'll come through Helena. If they're coming from the west, they're empty. And that is just losing money for the train, for the railroads. There's no coal. The coal comes from eastern Montana, eastern Wyoming, westward. The same thing, we see those big containers from China. The containers coming from the west are full. The containers coming from the east are empty. Oh, if you see a coal train coming from the west or a container, those containers which look like the back of trucks coming from the east, it's going to be a long train. That's how you know. Coal train from the west, it's long because they're empty, so they can have a longer train. See, there's my little piece of advice. See, I'm giving you all kinds of life lessons, aren't you? Aren't I? So that's the one. If you see that train coming, go to an underpass. Unless you like hanging out watching trains. Okay, but this is called proto-capitalism. Capital is machines that do work. We're still not quite doing that, so it's proto is embryonic. It just started. And what's the capitalism? The ship. The ship owners make this product, and it will produce goods or produce money because it can ship goods back and forth. Now, most of the goods are still made by hand, but the ships are like a machine. We're coming close to a modern economy, something that we understand. The printing press is proto-capitalism. It's a machine that does work. Humans can be machines too. Slavery is proto-capitalism. The slaves are the machines, and they are worked to death. And so, let me give you a classic example of triangular trade. One ship, the Sanderson, 1752. And this wonderful ship, I should add, it's going to be gone for about 18 months. Things moved a lot slower then. Can you imagine being on board a ship for 18 months? What is your diet on board the ship?
Stale bread.
Yeah, hard crackers called hardtack, but yeah, that's not bread. And it's hard baked, double baked, so it doesn't rot as fast.
But don't they also bring like animals on board?
They might bring a few, but how long can they last? And you don't want to bring a lot of animals because the animals require other food. Yeah.
Do you think that the like names of largest ships ever employed the line sailors and most of many that ended for around line out there and
You know, they might try, but they had nothing. They're so, they couldn't hardly communicate. They were so shocked by the affair that they really didn't have much chance. But we'll talk more about the Middle Passage a little bit later. I'll trip over. Yeah.
Didn't they also like pickle stuff?
They might pickle a few things, but once again, it's room. What's the disease from the deficiency of vitamin C? Sure, they're just discovering that. That's why they started bringing like lime juice. That's why you hear Brits called limeys. It's because they're kind of the seafaring people, thus they drink a lot of lime juice. But misery. Here's a good example of it. So we'll start this way. In the West Indies, they would carry molasses to New England. This ship did. What do they make from molasses up here? Rum. Did I put rum here?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. They would take that rum here and trade for what? Human beings. Yep. They also brought a few other things, iron bars and a few other things, but the big thing was rum. And then they would take slaves to the sugar plantations here in Barbados. And so the ship was always full of something they could trade. So they never lost money. That's the triangular trade. Molasses, rum, slaves. And molasses is refined sugar. You know what happens if you get sugar wet? It dissolves. Molasses, because it's refined and more bitter, but it's that liquid, it lasts a lot longer. A lot longer. And so with that, here we got the population. So what we have then is, we have this colonial imperialism sucking the wealth out. We've already defined imperialism. But the thing is, you'll notice by this map by 1700, it's happening all over. There's imperialism. The Ottoman Empire right here is an imperial power taking over here. Russia is sweeping into here. This wasn't part of Russia yet, they're fighting for it. China was imperial power into Korea. They were moving into Vietnam. Persia was a kind of imperial. The Dutch took what is now Indonesia. The French were here. This is happening all over the world. And soon these imperial powers are going to come into conflict. Along the colonies, you'll see this as the colonies begin to move westward, taking land. They came in conflict with various tribes here, desperate to try to keep their land, and the French are moving this way. And the people in the interior are being squeezed. And this would be personified by one of those things that happened both in North and the South. Please be the right slide. The fur trade. When the colonists first arrived, there was trade between the colonists and the various tribes. The colonists needed everything when they first arrived. Remember we talked about the starving time when you read about it? They had nothing. So there was trade along the frontier. And the colonists needed everything. And the various tribes, devastated by disease, their old farming systems fell apart. You can imagine how much they needed trade too. And so here is an example of trade for beaver pelt. But quickly, as time, so the tribes, devastated by disease, they're also kind of stopping their normal farming. It's hard to have a farming community. So many die so fast. Or disillusion. Just think about what happened to some families because of COVID, and over 1.5 million Americans died because of this, and just the absolute misery. And I don't think people have quite realized how that's going to be. Just imagine if 90% died. It's incomprehensible what happened. And so their old practices ended, yet they still have to make a living. And here you got these colonists who need everything. everything. So very quickly, let's see if it works, as the colonies grew, the trade became more and more centered on food. Because did I say food? Fur. The colonists begin to grow their own food, so they don't need food as much. They begin ironwork, so they don't need pots. For example, New England tribes were famous for being able to make watertight baskets out of tree bark. Anyone at home make watertight baskets out of tree bark? Why don't you make watertight baskets out of tree bark? Good part. There's two reasons. You got the big one. First off, it's much easier to buy it. What's the other part? How do you do it? Can you imagine how long it would take to learn how to do that? Okay, you would try to hunt or do target practice with a bow and arrow. It's hard, isn't it? I mean, it's easy to pull back, but you can't hit anything. And now imagine making that bow. How long it would take to make a good one and learn how to hunt. What's easier to do? Buy it or buy a musket. Okay, they're not quite as accurate, but they're a lot easier to shoot. Be good at, relatively good. How hard is it to grow crops? And I don't mean going to buy the seed, I mean doing the whole process. How hard is that? Buy the food. So what happened was, as the colonists started wanting, right along the frontier, right along the edge of the frontier. So remember, in 1630, the edge of the frontier is right here. You know, by 1670, it's here. The colonists can only want fur. So what did the tribes along this edge of it do? Pretty soon they just started killing animals for the fur. Beaver. What about farming? Why farm anymore? Why make a bow? Why make that watertight basket when you could trade 2 beaver pelts and get an iron pot? See what's happening. They traded for fur, and the next thing you know, please be the right slide, as they traded for fur, they got their food, everything else they needed. Pretty soon, all those old ways are gone. How long do you suppose it took for the tribes to lose those skills? You're about right. With at least 1 generation. It's amazing how fast that happens. So I have skills that I had to learn when I was younger. And they're gone now. You don't have them. I can do things you can't do, but most of the things I can do don't have any purpose anymore. The same thing as my parents had to do things that I couldn't do. I don't have to do them anymore, at least yet. And so on. It's amazing how fast. You're talking to my mom about the things they had to do growing up, and how to do them. And I learned how to type on a portable manual typewriter. I don't have a computer. What are you talking about? Little things like that. No, that does not make me smarter or dumber than you. It just means the skills are just gone. So pretty soon they can't farm anymore. And what happened to all the animals? Well, all on the frontier, then you're going to see this happen. The tribes, they give up that. They start killing beaver and do nothing else. So you have to kill more and more beaver to survive. Well, they're really good at it. So what happens? Well, first off now, the frontier tribes become dependent upon the colonies. And then they kill all the animals. They kill all the beaver. Soon there's going to be no beaver along the Connecticut River right here. They killed them all. Or at least all the ones they could get relatively easily. And we'll see this time after time after time. They killed them all. And so now, to the colonial point of view, they're not farming, they're wasting the land. I thought I got rid of that picture. Okay, I'll come back to that picture. They're wasting the land. To the colonial point of view, you have to be using it in some way. They're not even using it to kill beaver. If you're wasting the land,
You're an enemy.
yeah, what are you there for? And so this shows the battle between the Spanish and American Indians, but the same thing happened. They moved west and took the land because they're just wasting it. And remember, what we now call racism would also give them another excuse. they're lower than us anyways, English could say. Which of course, think about what happened just a few years earlier. The colonists needed everything from them and then pushed them aside. So with that, what we have is known as settler colonialism. Settler colonialism. And so they came in and took the land. There's a great Latin term for this. And you see this written a lot in the end of the 1600s, 1700s. They call it terra nullius. And what they said is terra, land, nullius, empty. They came into this land and it was empty, so they could take it. And that's how they partially justified it, to take the land. Why was it empty? Disease, and they weren't using it the way that the Europeans used it. So we're going to take it. And so there's going to be this whole mythology about the settlers coming in, and here's a very stylized etching of it. But let's be clear about a couple of things. First off, yeah, they were brave. They had to be creative, ingenuity. You know, it's tough, hard work. But they're also coming in and stealing somebody's land, and therefore it's even this watercolor from the 1750s, fight for it. It's also kind of an amazing thing if you think about it for a second. Just gonna go take their land. And then I'm gonna come up with a legal system and say it's mine. It may be like someone from Saskatchewan coming down south and saying, you know, I don't think these people are using it right, I'm taking it. And you say, no, I have legal right. Not to me, I have my own courts. You don't apply. You contemplate that for a second. It's kind of amazing. If you're sitting on land, that's what happened. The French claimed they made a legal claim because they made it up and say we have legal rights. And then the United States bought that legal claim, and then they pushed out the people who lived here and took it. And so that's what we call an invasion. That's what Russia's trying to do to Ukraine. Same thing. It's the exact same thing. It's kind of amazing, but it all depends on the point of view of who's doing it. Yes. And so that, settler colonialism. So with that, we're leading up to a big war. A big war. Same year as Bacon's Rebellion, King Phillips War. And it started along the Connecticut River. And this was all about the fur trade. They killed the animals, settlers moved in, American Indians fought back. That's where I thought I put the King Philip. And the biggest tribe, who at first fought against all these other tribes, and Massachusetts helped, was called the Wampanoags. They formed a confederacy of enemy tribes. This was always the problem the American Indians had. They fought each other so much that even when they unified, it was never a big unification. Confederacy is a loose unification, but they quickly fell apart. One defeat, one bad thing, it's very loose. Their leader, okay, I told you women made the big decisions, but the British looked for a man. That's what the British assumed. And a king or a chief. That's what the British looked for. So here's a picture of who the British called one of the leaders of the Wampanoags, warrior leaders. But remember, women made the decisions. The British called him King Philip. But phonetically, his name was that. How they got Philip out of that, I'll never know. No, I'm not sure exactly where the accents are. I think it's on the second one, so I think it's metacomet. Metacomet. But I am an English speaker and I see metacomet. Anyone else see metacomet? I'm pretty sure that's not it. Creative warrior realized we have no choice, and they attacked everywhere. You don't need to know the numbers, but there were 90 Puritan villages. They attacked 52. But they killed 10% of the colonial population would be killed, the rest would retreat. So the point is, the Wampanoag Confederacy won. I should add, these battles on the frontier are bloody, nasty affairs. Here is an attack on one of these settler villages. They were pushed back west. The Wampanoag Confederacy won. They won, hands down, game over, won. But there was going to be a peace treaty. And they agreed to have a big kind of Thanksgiving. They would meet, big celebration. Don't bring your weapons. Now the British dealt with men, so all the men came. No weapons. The best fighters of this confederacy, including, I'm mispronouncing it, Metacomet, waiting in the woods were colonial militia or weapons. And so colonists from Massachusetts, they're at the table, they're eating, they're bringing out wine, and one by one they would filter into the woods and meet up with other ones. They charged out of the woods in an ambush and slaughtered them. Here is a picture. This is actually from a pamphlet in Massachusetts from the 1700s, but it's showing this, the slaughter. And here's one from the 1800s, but it's the supposed finding of King Philip. Who won? Massachusetts won. And this would form a template for future wars. Divide and conquer and surprise attacks by the colonists and then by the United States. The standard tactic of the United States along the plains against American Indians who they're trying to subdue and force into reservations were surprise attacks in winter. Surprise attack in winter, attack villages and take hostages. That was the American strategy. Take hostages of women and children to force a struggle. Have you heard of the Battle of Little Bighorn? When Lieutenant Colonel Custer divided his forces, his force was going to raid the camp to take hostages. Women and children. Find children, hold them at gunpoint, force a struggle. That was the strategy. These wars are horrific. Yeah.
Would they actually hurt the women and children or just
because they would fight it out. But the plan was to hold them so that the fighters would go. There was a pretty clear division of labor in that. Yes. Yeah.
Did they also like kill some of them, like show that they were not?
Maybe, but most of them they didn't necessarily plan on doing it. But yeah, they would kill a lot when they would attack. When they would attack a village, when these surprise attacks, yeah, they would kill. And we'll get to one place called, like, for example, Sand Creek, or what's going to be called Baker's Massacre in Montana.
Yeah.
And so, this will be a template that's going to happen time after time, but it's going to roll into this series of wars that we dub the Wars for Empire. And along the colonial frontier, they're all going to happen here. But these are going to be worldwide wars for empire, all over the world. Now, when we think of worldwide wars, all of us think of probably World War I and World War II. And yes, they both had their elements of wars for empire. But these are relatively small wars fought with very small armies or along colonial frontiers. But in North America, it was a fur trade along the frontier of France. And one of the key elements is the various tribes. You can imagine how the tribes they're trying to play the French off on the British. Because they know if there's only one colonial power, they can focus on the tribes. The French had better relations because there weren't as many French colonists. Now, there's going to be a series of wars. And so the plan is, Monday, if everything goes right, we are going to watch a video. Kind of set things up, and then I'll go through the wars. We will be fighting the Revolutionary War, and it'll be over next week. Happened pretty fast. At least the Declaration of Independence. We have a full week next week. Are you excited? Be excited because you have no choice. Are you excited?
No.
There you go.
Wait, I need to sign this because if he transfers from class,
What are you doing?
I don't want to. But my parents told me that it would be necessary.
You're going out of APUSH history?
Yeah.
Why?
I switched because I have 2 other AP classes, and my parents figured it would be better for me to just stick with those other ones.
Yeah, it's really easy.
Well, it's too bad. I mean, you're going to miss out.
I am going to miss out. Have a nice weekend, Mr.
You too. We'll see you.
I think that's what this notice. Things like this.
All right. Well, good luck in those other classes. It's too bad you're going. I think you will miss out. But
I'm sorry.
it's a good class. That's all right.
Yeah.
We'll see ya.
Someone left their jacket. Hi, Tim.
Next time.
Hi, Tim.
I'll watch it. I'll leave it there. Thank you for telling me. I learned people where they left. They always come back. See you tomorrow. See you Monday. With sound effects. I don't think I have that skill set to sit down. Go! You've had a lot of practice. Okay. Then I dropped.
Yeah.
But
See?
I'm old.
And I had a lot of practice.
So you skipped yesterday.
Just don't put it back. Oh, no.
Yes. I let you in. I would have dove. Yeah, whatever.
I don't know if I can learn this song.
Just wing it. Ready? I'm gonna bounce it off the desk. You ready? Yes! We are getting good. Well done. Terrible throw, good catch. Don't hit anybody unless they deserve it. Who's next? Off the wall. I would go, I mean,
Like my nose is wrong. My nose is probably quite good, but what do you
what's more important? Okay, I have good news. They gave me a new computer. But I just, okay, it's not that new, but it's relatively new. But I did reinstall everything and do all that stuff. So I did not get a chance to record yours in, so I'll get that back as soon as I.
No.
Nice. So you're bailing?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's on you. You're both leaving?
I get really overwhelmed in the winter and I
All right, good luck.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I will have a couple of things on PowerPoint because I can now kind of do it. But I'm going to leave this screen on because it's such a pain to turn it on and off.
Give me a sec.
And then, oh wait,